Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. As the elevator chimed, announcing his arrival at the top floor, Lionel took a deep breath. He stepped out into the plush, carpeted hallway, the muffled bass from the club below thrumming through the walls. At the end of the corridor, a heavy oak door loomed, the brass nameplate gleaming, Maxwell Thornton, owner. Lionel knocked, his knuckles barely grazing the wood before a gruff voice called out, "Come in!" The office was dimly lit, the city skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Maxwell Thornton, a burly man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, sat behind an imposing desk. He gestured for Lionel to take a seat. "Lionel, glad you could make it on such short notice," Maxwell said, his tone businesslike but tinged with an undercurrent of urgency. "Of course, sir. Is everything all right?" Maxwell leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "I have a delicate situation that requires your unique skills." Lionel raised an eyebrow. "Sir, our sister club across town, Sapphire, has been underperforming lately. I need someone to go in, assess the situation, and report back, but it needs to be done discreetly." "Wouldn't it be easier to just send in a management team?" Lionel asked, confusion evident in his voice. Maxwell shook his head. No, we can't risk tipping them off. I need someone who can blend in, observe without being noticed, someone who can see things from a different perspective." Realization dawned on Lionel. "You want me to go undercover?" "Precisely," Maxwell nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You've always had a knack for reading people, Lionel, and your attention to detail is unparalleled. I need you to go in there as a patron, get a feel for the place, the staff, the atmosphere. See if you can figure out why our numbers are dropping." Lionel shifted in his seat, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I'm flattered, sir, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. I mean, I work behind the scenes. I'm not exactly inconspicuous." Maxwell leaned back in his chair, studying Lionel for a moment. "That's where the undercover part comes in. We need to disguise you." "Disguise me?" Lionel echoed, his mind racing with possibilities. "Yes," Maxwell confirmed, his tone becoming more animated. "We need to transform you into someone completely different. Someone who can walk into Sapphire without raising any suspicions." Lionel's mouth went dry. "What exactly did you have in mind, sir?" Maxwell's eyes twinkled with mischief. "How do you feel about drag, Lionel?" The words hung in the air for a moment, Lionel's brain struggling to process them. Drag? As in, dressing up as a woman? Exactly. Maxwell nodded, seemingly pleased with himself. "It's perfect. No one would ever suspect." Lionel's mind reeled. He'd never even considered something like this before. "Sir, I don't know the first thing about drag. I wouldn't even know where to start." Maxwell waved a hand dismissively. "Don't worry about that. We have people who can help you with the transformation. Makeup artists, stylists, the works. All you need to do is say yes." Lionel sat back in his chair, his thoughts a whirlwind. On one hand, the idea terrified him. He'd never been one for the spotlight, preferring to work behind the scenes. The thought of dressing up as a woman and walking into a crowded club filled him with dread. But on the other hand, he couldn't deny the thrill of excitement that coursed through him at the prospect of such an adventure. I don't know, sir," Lionel said hesitantly. "It's a lot to take in." Maxwell leaned forward, his expression serious. "Lionel, I wouldn't ask this of you if I didn't think you were capable. This is important for the business, and I trust you to handle it with discretion and professionalism." Lionel took a deep breath, weighing his options. The rational part of his brain screamed at him to decline, to stay in his comfort zone. But another part of him, a part he rarely listened to, whispered of excitement and new experiences. "All right," Lionel heard himself say, almost as if someone else was speaking. "I'll do it." Maxwell's face broke into a broad grin. "Excellent! I knew I could count on you, Lionel. We'll start preparations immediately." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Lionel was introduced to a team of experts who would help with his transformation. There was Mia, a petite woman with vibrant blue hair who specialized in makeup, Carlos, a flamboyant stylist with an eye for fashion, and Veronica, a wig expert who promised to find the perfect look for Lionel's new persona. As the team worked their magic, Lionel found himself both terrified and fascinated by the process. Mia taught him the basics of applying makeup, showing him how to contour his face to appear more feminine. Carlos helped him choose outfits that would flatter his new figure, complete with padding in all the right places. Veronica fitted him with a variety of wigs, finally settling on a long, wavy auburn number that framed his face perfectly. "You need a name," Mia declared on the third day of their crash course in drag. "Something exotic, but not too over the top." Lionel, still getting used to the feel of false eyelashes, blinked at her in the mirror. "A name?" "Of course, darling," Carlos chimed in, adjusting the hem of the sequined dress Lionel wore. "You can't very well go by Lionel when you look like this." They brainstormed for a while, tossing around various options. Finally, Veronica snapped her fingers. "I've got it! Yara!" "Yara?" Lionel repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "It's perfect," Mia nodded approvingly. "Exotic, mysterious, just like you'll be." And so Yara was born. As the day of the undercover mission approached, Lionel spent hours practicing walking in heels, perfecting his feminine voice, and mastering the art of applying makeup. Despite his initial reservations, he found himself enjoying the process more than he'd expected. The night of the mission arrived all too soon. Lionel stood in front of the full-length mirror in his apartment, barely recognizing the person staring back at him. Yara wore a deep purple cocktail dress. The auburn wig cascaded over his shoulders in soft waves, and expertly applied makeup transformed his features into something softer, more feminine. A knock at the door startled him out of his reverie. He opened it to find Ryan, a colleague from the club who had volunteered to accompany him on this mission as his date. Ryan whistled low. "Wow, Yara, you look incredible." Lionel felt a blush creep up his neck, thankful for the heavy foundation that hid it. "Thanks," he murmured, his voice pitched higher than usual. "Shall we?" The ride to Sapphire was tense, Lionel's nerves fraying with each passing minute. Ryan, sensing his discomfort, placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Relax," he said softly. "You've got this." As they pulled up to the club, Lionel took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of confidence he could muster. He stepped out of the car, his heels clicking on the pavement, and linked his arm through Ryan's. The bouncer at the door gave them a once-over before nodding and unclipping the velvet rope. As they entered the club, the pulsing beat of the music washed over them. Lionel felt his heart racing, a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through his veins. They made their way to the bar, Lionel's eyes darting around, taking in every detail. The decor was sleek and modern, but he noticed chipping paint in the corners and a few burnt-out bulbs in the elaborate light fixtures. Small details, but they spoke volumes about the club's maintenance, or lack thereof. Ryan leaned in close, his lips brushing Lionel's ear. "What do you think so far?" Lionel turned to respond, but his words caught in his throat as he locked eyes with the bartender. The man was staring at him intently, a slow smile spreading across his face. For a moment, Lionel panicked, certain he'd been recognized. But then the bartender winked and asked, "What can I get for you, beautiful?" Swallowing hard, Lionel pitched his voice higher. "Vodka martini, please, dirty." As the bartender prepared their drinks, Lionel's confidence grew. He hadn't been discovered. He was pulling this off. Over the next few hours, Lionel and Ryan circulated through the club. They danced, mingled with other patrons, and observed the staff. Lionel noticed several issues. Bartenders who were heavy-handed with the pours, bouncers who seemed more interested in flirting than maintaining order, and a general lack of enthusiasm from the staff. As the night wore on, Lionel found himself actually enjoying the experience. There was something liberating about being Yara, about the way people looked at him with admiration rather than the usual professional detachment. It was nearing closing time when Ryan leaned in close again. "We should probably head out soon. You've got all the intel we need, right?" Lionel nodded, a twinge of disappointment settling in his chest. He was surprised to realize he wasn't ready for the night to end. As they made their way towards the exit, a commotion near the bar caught their attention. A clearly intoxicated patron was arguing loudly with one of the bartenders, his voice rising above the music. "I said I wanted a Long Island iced tea, not this watered-down crap," the man shouted, slamming his glass on the bar. The bartender, a young woman with a nervous expression, tried to placate him. "Sir, I assure you that drink was made correctly. Perhaps you'd like to order something else?" The man's face contorted with anger. "Are you calling me a liar?" He raised his hand as if to strike the bartender. Without thinking, Lionel stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his Yara voice steady and confident. "Is there a problem here?" The drunk man turned, his bleary eyes focusing on Lionel. For a moment, Lionel's heart raced, certain he'd made a mistake. But then the man's expression softened. "Well, hello there, gorgeous," he slurred, forgetting about the bartender entirely. "What's your name?" Lionel forced a smile. "That's not important. What is important is that you're making a scene. Why don't you let me call you a cab?" The man considered this for a moment, then nodded. "All right, sweetheart, but only if you promise to come with me." Lionel's mind raced, trying to find a way out of this situation. Suddenly, Ryan was at his side, slipping an arm around his waist. "Sorry, pal," Ryan said smoothly. "This one's spoken for." The drunk man looked between them, disappointment clear on his face. But he didn't argue, allowing one of the bouncers to escort him out. As soon as he was gone, the bartender sagged with relief. "Thank you," she said to Lionel. That could have gotten ugly. Lionel smiled, feeling a rush of satisfaction. "No problem. Are you okay?" The bartender nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. It's just, this kind of thing has been happening more often lately. Management doesn't seem to care." Lionel filed this information away, making a mental note to include it in his report. "Well, take care of yourself," he said, giving the bartender a sympathetic smile before allowing Ryan to lead him towards the exit. Once they were in the car and headed back to Lionel's apartment, Ryan let out a low whistle. "That was impressive, Lionel. You handled that situation like a pro." Lionel leaned back in his seat, the adrenaline from the confrontation slowly fading. "Thanks. I don't know what came over me. I just reacted." Ryan glanced at him, a look of admiration in his eyes. "Well, whatever it was, it worked. You were amazing in there. The whole night, actually." Lionel felt a warmth spread through his chest at the compliment. As they drove through the quiet streets, he found himself reflecting on the evening. Despite his initial reservations, he had to admit that he'd enjoyed being Yara more than he'd expected. There was a confidence, a power in the persona that he'd never experienced before. By the time they reached his apartment, exhaustion had set in. The weight of the wig, the pinch of the heels, and the late hour all conspired to drain the last of Lionel's energy. "Do you need help getting all that off?" Ryan asked as he pulled up to the curb. Lionel shook his head, stifling a yawn. "No, I think I can manage. Thanks for everything tonight, Ryan. I couldn't have done it without you." Ryan smiled. "Anytime, partner. Get some rest. I'm sure Maxwell will want a full report in the morning." Lionel nodded, fumbling with the door handle before stepping out onto the sidewalk. He waved as Ryan drove off, then made his way up to his apartment. Once inside, he kicked off the heels with a sigh of relief, padding barefoot to the bathroom. As he stared at his reflection in the mirror, Lionel was struck by the dichotomy of his appearance. Yara stared back at him, all glamour and confidence, but he could see traces of himself peeking through in the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. With careful, practiced movements, he began to remove the makeup. As each layer came off, Lionel felt like he was shedding more than just foundation and eyeshadow. He was saying goodbye to Yara, at least for now. By the time he crawled into bed, the sun was starting to peek over the horizon. Lionel's last thoughts before drifting off to sleep were of the night's events. The thrill of the disguise, the satisfaction of gathering information, the rush of confronting the drunk patron, and underneath it all, a nagging question. Was this really the last time he'd be Yara? The next morning, Lionel woke to the insistent buzzing of his phone. Groggily, he fumbled for it, squinting at the screen. It was a text from Maxwell.
"My office, 2 p.m. Bring your report."
Lionel groaned, rolling over to check the time. It was already past noon. He'd slept far longer than he'd intended. Forcing himself out of bed, he shuffled to the bathroom, wincing at his reflection. Despite his best efforts the night before, traces of eyeliner still clung to his lashes, and there was a faint shimmer on his cheekbones from leftover highlighter. As he showered and dressed in his usual work attire, a crisp white shirt and dark slacks, Lionel found his mind wandering back to the previous night. The memory of being Yara felt almost dreamlike now in the harsh light of day. But the intel he'd gathered was very real, and he spent the next hour compiling his observations into a coherent report. At precisely 2 p.m., Lionel knocked on Maxwell's office door. His boss's gruff voice called him in, and Lionel entered, report in hand. Maxwell looked up from his computer, a grin spreading across his face.
"Ah, Lionel, or should I say Yara, come in. Tell me everything."
Lionel took a seat, handing over the report. As Maxwell flipped through the pages, Lionel gave a verbal summary of his findings: the lax security, the overpouring bartenders, the general lack of enthusiasm among the staff. He also recounted the incident with the drunk patron, careful to frame it as an example of the club's poor management rather than focusing on his own intervention. When he finished, Maxwell leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "This is excellent work, Lionel. Exactly the kind of detailed observation I was hoping for." Lionel felt a flush of pride at the praise. "Thank you, sir. I'm glad I could help." Maxwell nodded, then fixed Lionel with a penetrating gaze.
"And how did you find the experience? Being undercover, I mean."
Lionel hesitated, unsure how to answer. He thought about the thrill of the transformation, the confidence he'd felt as Yara, the satisfaction of solving problems from a different perspective.
"It was enlightening,"
he said finally. "Challenging, but also rewarding in ways I hadn't expected." A slow smile spread across Maxwell's face. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, leaning forward, "because I have a proposition for you." Lionel raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued.
"Sir?" "Your success at Sapphire got me thinking," Maxwell began, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "We have several other clubs in the city that could benefit from this kind of undercover assessment. And now that we know how effective this method can be..."
Lionel's heart began to race as he realized where this was going.
"You want me to do this again?" Maxwell nodded enthusiastically. "Not just once. I'm proposing we make this a regular operation. You'd visit our various clubs as Yara, gather intel, help us improve our business across the board."
Lionel sat back, stunned. This was the last thing he'd expected when he'd agreed to the initial undercover mission. His mind raced with the implications, the excitement of more adventures as Yara, but also the challenges and risks that would come with it. I don't know what to say, sir," Lionel stammered. "It's a lot to take in." Maxwell held up a hand.
"I understand. It's a big decision. Take some time to think it over. But consider this. You have a unique opportunity here. Not many people get the chance to see the world from such a different perspective, and the insights you could provide, well, they could revolutionize our business."
Lionel nodded slowly, his mind still reeling.
"How long do I have to decide?"
"Take a week," Maxwell said. "Think it over carefully. If you decide to do this, we'll set you up with everything you need. A complete wardrobe, ongoing training, the works. You'd still keep your current position, of course. This would be additional responsibilities." As Lionel left Maxwell's office, his head was spinning.
The idea of becoming Yara on a regular basis both thrilled and terrified him. He thought about the confidence he'd felt in that persona, the way people had looked at him with admiration and respect, but he also thought about the risks, the possibility of being discovered, the strain of leading a double life. Over the next few days, Lionel found himself unable to stop thinking about the proposition. He caught himself studying women on the street, noting their mannerisms, the way they walked and talked. He found himself lingering in front of shop windows, eyeing dresses and heels with a newfound interest. On the third day, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, Lionel reached out to Mia, the makeup artist who had helped with his transformation. They met for coffee, and Lionel confided in her about Maxwell's offer. Mia listened intently, her blue hair catching the sunlight as she nodded along. When Lionel finished speaking, she sat back with a knowing smile. "You want to do it, don't you?" she said, more statement than question. Lionel sighed, running a hand through his hair. I think I do. But I'm scared. What if I'm not cut out for it? What if I get found out?" Mia reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "Lionel, honey, let me tell you something. The way you took to drag, it's not something I see every day. You have a natural talent for it. And more than that, I saw how it changed you. You came alive as Yara in a way I've never seen you do as Lionel." Her words struck a chord in Lionel. He thought back to that night at Sapphire, to the rush he'd felt when he'd diffused the situation with the drunk patron. As Yara, he'd felt capable of anything. "But what about my regular life?" Lionel asked, voicing one of his biggest concerns. "How do I balance being Lionel and Yara?" Mia squeezed his arm gently. "That's something you'll have to figure out as you go. But remember, Yara is a part of you. She's not separate from Lionel. She's an extension of you, a different facet of your personality. Embracing her doesn't mean losing yourself. If anything, it might help you discover parts of yourself you never knew existed." Lionel mulled over her words, feeling a sense of clarity beginning to emerge. He thought about the excitement he'd felt during the transformation, the thrill of stepping into Sapphire as someone entirely new. He thought about the potential to make a real difference in the business, to see things from a unique perspective. As the week drew to a close, Lionel found himself standing outside Maxwell's office once again. This time, there was no hesitation as he knocked on the door. Maxwell looked up as he entered, a question in his eyes. "Well, Lionel, have you made a decision?" Lionel took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "Yes, sir, I have." A slow smile spread across Maxwell's face as Lionel continued. "I'd like to accept your offer. I'm ready to become Yara, officially." Maxwell clapped his hands together, his excitement palpable. "Excellent! I had a feeling you'd come around. We'll start preparations immediately. You're going to do great things, Lionel, or should I say, Yara." As Lionel left the office, he felt a mix of nervousness and excitement bubbling up inside him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready for the challenge. As he stepped into the elevator, he caught his reflection in the polished doors. For a moment, he swore he could see a hint of Yara looking back at him, a mischievous glint in her eye. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.